I went to my vacation house and found my sisters renting the parking space for Monet arrived. At my coastal retreat, expecting quiet, and instead found chaos spread across every inch of the driveway. The place I had designed as my refuge now suffocated by rows of expensive vehicles packed together like merchandise. The ocean breeze carried laughter that did not belong here, and the sight alone made my chest tighten because this hilltop home, overlooking the Pacific, had been earned through years of relentless work as a senior architect. Long nights swallowed by deadlines and responsibility, and weekends were the only time I allowed myself to breathe. Yet now a neon sign stood at the entrance, screaming Palisades Azure Mall exclusive temporary parking. $50 per day reservation required payment by app only. The words burned into my vision, as if mocking the sacrifices behind every stone and beam of the house I built to survive my own life. Lauren, my eldest sister, lounged behind a folding table near the front door, casually swirling a mimosa as if she owned the view. Megan and Olivia sat beside her, glued to their phones, laughing at something on their screens. When I demanded an explanation, Lauren barely looked up and said, with a shrug, that I only came on weekends and the land should be used better when it sat empty. Her tone light and dismissive, as though she were discussing borrowed furniture instead of my home. My mind reeled as I tried to process the betrayal unfolding in front of me. This was not a misunderstanding or a harmless favor, but a calculated invasion of the one place that kept me sane. Anger surged through my fingertips as I stepped out of my car and walked closer. The smell of oil and rubber hung in the air and tire tracks scarred the stone path I had spent months perfecting with landscapers. I asked how they could allow strangers onto my property without permission. Megan snapped back that the mall was always overcrowded and they were helping people while contributing to society. Olivia chimed in, saying the business had been booming for a month and wealthy shoppers barely noticed the fee. Each word made my head spin because a month meant they had exploited my absence with intention. Every weekend I was gone, buried in work. They had turned my sanctuary into a cash machine. I ordered them to shut it down immediately and remove every car, my voice cold and controlled as I warned them this was trespassing and an illegal business. Lauren stood slowly and accused me of being stingy and selfish. She said I earned enough and should share with family, and even offered me 10% of the profits as a management fee. Something inside me fractured at that moment because the excuse of family had been used against me my entire life, but this crossed into outright theft and betrayal. I pulled out my phone and told them I would protect my rights. Lauren's face drained of color as she realized what I intended. She tried to stop me, insisting it was just a family misunderstanding. I told her I would reconsider only if she answered my questions. How they accessed the house when I alone had the keys. Megan finally confessed that 6 months earlier, during our grandmother's funeral, they had taken my bag from the living room and copied the spare key. That admission struck harder than any insult because that day had been soaked in grief and trust. While I mourned, they rummaged through my belongings, planning their advantage. Olivia tried to justify it by claiming it was for emergencies. Lauren then proudly explained how she came up with the parking scheme after waiting hours at the mall, detailing pricing and reservations as if pitching a startup. Listening to them describe their planning made my stomach churn. They spoke of my home as a resource to exploit, not a place built with discipline and sacrifice. I cut them off and spoke to the emergency operator, reporting multiple individuals trespassing and conducting unauthorized commercial activity. Lauren grabbed at my arm, but I shook her off and told her never to touch me. I reminded them of the 60-hour weeks and pressure that led to this house and how they trampled it for pocket money. For a moment, they seemed shaken by the resolve in my voice. But Lauren quickly shrieked that I was overreacting and threatened parental backlash. I told her my parents' opinions were irrelevant and demanded the tablet records as evidence. Megan hid it and dared me to sue. I replied that was exactly my intention, as sirens echoed closer, carried by the sea air. 2 patrol cars rolled into the driveway, lights flashing across the garish sign and the rows of cars. Officers stepped out, assessing the scene. I identified myself as Claire, the sole owner, and explained my sisters had entered without permission and were running an illegal parking operation. Lauren tried to interrupt, claiming it was a family gathering and that I exaggerated. Megan and Olivia backed her up, saying the sign was a joke and no money was taken. I calmly asked for a moment and produced documents from my bag, the deed proving sole ownership, and screenshots of their reservation site along with a video of the sign clearly listing the fee. I pointed out the card reader and tablet managing sales and explained the seriousness of unlicensed commercial use in a residential zone. An officer examined the tablet despite Lauren's protests. Then I revealed that I had known about the copied key since the funeral because of metal shavings I noticed. that I waited deliberately and even disabled the security system as bait while monitoring hidden cameras for a month. Videos showed them collecting payments day after day, and the color drained from their faces as the illusion of forgiveness collapsed. I pressed charges without compromise, and the officers moved to detain them as the driveway fell silent except for their panicked cries, ending the moment my home was finally reclaimed but signaling a far longer battle ahead. The patrol cars stayed parked longer than I expected as officers sorted through statements and documentation. Neighbors gathered at a cautious distance, whispering and filming with phones held low. The ocean wind carried embarrassment and disbelief across the driveway while Lauren, Megan, and Olivia were escorted aside, their earlier confidence replaced with frantic pleading that echoed against the glass walls of my home. I stood still near the entrance, feeling a strange calm settle in because the chaos that once felt invasive now felt contained. The land breathed again, even with the mess still scattered everywhere. And for the first time since arriving, I felt grounded in my decision rather than shaken by it. As the officers explained the charges and outlined next steps, I watched my sisters avoid my eyes. Lauren attempted to regain composure by straightening her clothes and insisting this would all blow over. Megan whispered that lawyers would sort it out while Olivia cried openly, claiming she never meant harm. Their reactions felt distant, like a scene playing behind thick glass, because my focus had shifted inward. I was processing the weight of family bonds, snapping under pressure, recognizing that blood alone could not excuse calculated betrayal, and accepting that protecting myself meant letting consequences unfold without interference. When the officers finally left with formal warnings issued and court notices served, the driveway emptied quickly. Cars were forced to leave one by one as confused drivers argued and demanded refunds. Megan tried to manage the chaos until she was told to stop interacting with customers immediately. Lauren cursed under her breath, blaming me for humiliation while Olivia sat on the curb shaking. Once the last vehicle disappeared down the hill, silence returned in heavy waves, broken only by gulls and distant surf. The neon sign was taken down and leaned against the wall like discarded evidence of greed, and the space slowly returned to something resembling my refuge. I walked through the house, inspecting every room with a careful eye. Drawers disturbed, cabinets shifted, and faint footprints smudged along the polished concrete floors. Anger resurfaced, but it was steadier now, less explosive, more deliberate. I documented everything with my phone, noting damaged fixtures and missing items, knowing it would matter later. Each step reminded me how deeply they had invaded my private world. The kitchen smelled of spilled champagne and cheap perfume, a contrast to the quiet mornings I once cherished here. And that contrast strengthened my resolve rather than weakening it. That night, I barely slept as messages flooded my phone from extended family. My parents called repeatedly, leaving voicemails heavy with disappointment and confusion. They spoke of unity, forgiveness, and how family matters should stay private. I listened without responding because the narrative forming in their minds had already excluded my pain. The same pattern repeated itself that I had lived with for years, where my success was minimized and my boundaries treated as optional. Recognizing this pattern hurt more than the parking scheme itself because it confirmed a lifetime of imbalance I could no longer ignore. The next morning I met with my attorney over video call while sunlight spilled across the ocean view. We reviewed footage, financial records, and property laws, confirming that my case was strong. She advised restraint, patience, and consistency while reminding me that emotional manipulation often escalates when accountability appears. Her words grounded me as I prepared for the inevitable backlash. I authorized her to proceed fully and filed additional claims for property damage and lost use. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been eroded by years of compromise. By midday, Lauren arrived unannounced, pounding on the gate demanding to talk. I watched her through the security feed, noting how quickly indignation replaced fear. When I refused to open the gate, she shouted accusations of cruelty and greed, accusing me of destroying the family over money. I responded through the intercom, stating calmly that communication would now go through legal channels only. Hearing my own voice, steady and firm, surprised me because it marked a shift I had struggled to achieve before. Lauren left in a fury, promising retaliation that no longer intimidated me. Megan tried a different approach, sending long apologetic texts filled with rationalizations and subtle blame shifting. She claimed Lauren masterminded everything and that she only followed along. Olivia sent voice messages, sobbing and begging for mercy, insisting she would testify against the others if I dropped charges. These attempts fractured any lingering doubt because they revealed survival instincts rather than genuine remorse. I archived the messages and forwarded them to my attorney, understanding that clarity required distance, not negotiation. The emotional tug of sibling loyalty loosened with each manipulative plea. Days passed as the house slowly returned to order. Landscapers repaired damaged stonework, cleaners restored surfaces, and I replaced the locks personally, overseeing every change. Installing upgraded security brought peace of mind, as did reclaiming routines, like early morning coffee on the terrace and evening swims in the infinity pool. Yet beneath the calm, a tension lingered, knowing the legal process would stir conflict again. I used the time to reflect on how often I had been expected to sacrifice comfort for harmony, and how that expectation had shaped my silence for too long. When my parents finally visited, they arrived, subdued and cautious, sitting across from me at the dining table, where sunlight filtered through glass walls. They spoke carefully, acknowledging mistakes on all sides while subtly urging reconciliation. I listened patiently, then explained in detail how the key was copied during a moment of grief, and how the business ran for weeks without my knowledge. Their expressions shifted from defensiveness to discomfort as reality set in. I told them love without respect was unsustainable, and that accountability was not punishment but a boundary. The conversation ended quietly, without resolution, yet without shouting, which felt like progress of a different kind. Court dates loomed closer, and rumors spread among relatives, casting me alternately as villain and cautionary tale. I focused on my work, channeling stress into design projects and long hours that felt purposeful rather than draining. The house became a place of recovery again, hosting only trusted friends who understood the importance of boundaries. Laughter returned in healthier forms, and the ocean view regained its calming presence. Even as uncertainty hovered, I felt stronger, anchored by decisions aligned with self-respect rather than guilt. The first hearing arrived, bringing tension back into sharp focus as I entered the courthouse with measured steps. Lauren avoided my gaze, Megan looked resentful, and Olivia looked terrified, their unity fractured by fear and blame as evidence was presented methodically. Watching the judge review footage and financial records validated my choice to stand firm. It was no longer my word against theirs, but documented truth laid bare. As proceedings adjourned for the day, I felt a quiet certainty that whatever the outcome, I had already reclaimed something invaluable: my voice and my right to protect the life I built. Knowing the next phase would test that resolve even further. The weeks following the first hearing stretched longer than I expected as legal procedures moved with deliberate slowness, each day carrying a quiet tension that never fully lifted. I divided my time between work, the house, and meetings with my attorney, learning quickly that patience was not passive but an active discipline. Every document reviewed, every message logged, felt like another brick reinforcing a wall I had neglected to build for years. My sisters remained largely silent in public, yet active behind the scenes as whispers reached me through relatives and mutual acquaintances. Lauren began a campaign of narrative control, reaching out to extended family, framing herself as the eldest burdened sister, who only wanted to help the family financially. She painted me as distant, cold, and obsessed with control. The irony did not escape me, since control had been taken from me without consent. I resisted the urge to correct every lie, understanding that truth required evidence, not emotion. Megan aligned herself closely with Lauren again, abandoning her earlier apologies once she realized cooperation with me did not guarantee protection. Olivia withdrew, almost entirely disappearing from family gatherings and social media. My parents struggled, visibly caught between loyalty and denial. Phone calls became shorter and more guarded as they attempted to stay neutral, yet could not hide their discomfort. I sensed they hoped the issue would fade quietly without forcing them to confront years of favoritism and unspoken expectations. Instead, the situation demanded clarity, and that clarity unsettled them. I chose not to push, instead maintaining calm boundaries, reinforcing that reconciliation required accountability, not avoidance. At work, my focus sharpened unexpectedly. Projects flourished under my attention, and colleagues noticed the shift. One afternoon, my firm offered me a leadership role on a major coastal redevelopment project, a position that would demand even more time but also affirmed my professional standing. I accepted, knowing stability and self-trust were now intertwined. Success no longer felt like something to apologize for, but something earned and protected. The second hearing arrived, bringing with it a heavier atmosphere. Evidence presented included transaction histories, zoning violations, and testimonies from neighbors who confirmed the constant traffic. Lauren's attorney attempted to argue implied consent based on family access, but the copied key and recorded footage dismantled that claim quickly. Megan appeared irritated, tapping her foot while Olivia stared at the floor. The judge emphasized the seriousness of unauthorized commercial activity and property violation, signaling limited tolerance for excuses. During a recess, Lauren finally approached me in the hallway, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. She accused me of enjoying the spectacle and humiliating her publicly. I replied calmly that consequences were not performances and that she had orchestrated everything without regard for me. She scoffed and claimed I was punishing her for being less successful. That accusation struck deep because it revealed her core resentment, one I had sensed for years but never named. I told her quietly that envy did not justify exploitation and walked away before the conversation could spiral. Megan confronted me later, attempting intimidation instead of reconciliation. She warned that dragging this out would destroy family relationships permanently. I responded that they had already chosen that path when they copied my key and profited from my absence. She laughed bitterly, saying, "I always thought I was better than them." I did not deny my achievements, nor did I apologize for them. I simply stated that respect was non-negotiable and ended the exchange. The court ordered mediation as a procedural step, despite the strength of the case. I agreed, knowing it would likely expose deeper fractures rather than resolve them. The session took place in a neutral office with a mediator guiding conversation. Lauren insisted she deserved compensation for her efforts, claiming she improved the property value by monetizing unused space. Megan supported her while Olivia remained silent until prompted. When she finally spoke, her voice shook as she admitted fear drove her compliance: fear of being excluded, fear of financial instability, fear of Lauren's dominance. That admission shifted the room's energy but did not erase responsibility. I acknowledged Olivia's fear, while reaffirming that choice still mattered. The mediator suggested a settlement involving financial restitution and formal apology, but Lauren refused, stating she would never apologize for helping family. The session ended without agreement, confirming what I already knew, that compromise was impossible without accountability. Public perception began to shift subtly as details emerged through legal records rather than gossip. Neighbors who once watched silently began greeting me, warmly expressing support and relief that the unauthorized parking was gone. Some shared how uncomfortable they felt seeing constant traffic and strangers near their homes. Their validation grounded me, reinforcing that my stance was not selfish but necessary. Emotionally, I cycled through anger, sadness, and unexpected relief. Grief surfaced not only for the betrayal but for the version of family I once hoped for. Therapy became a space to unpack long-buried patterns of responsibility and guilt. I learned how often I equated worth with usefulness, and how saying no felt like abandonment. Confronting these patterns was painful, yet freeing as I practiced self-compassion without justification. One evening, while sorting old documents, I found sketches from the early days of designing the house, notes scribbled with dreams of peace and independence. Reading them reminded me why this place mattered beyond property value. It symbolized survival, autonomy, and healing. That realization strengthened my resolve to defend it fully, regardless of familial fallout. The judge issued a preliminary ruling holding Lauren and Megan primarily liable, with Olivia accountable to a lesser degree pending further review. Financial penalties were outlined alongside restrictions preventing any future access to my property without written consent. Seeing those boundaries formalized felt surreal, as if something I had struggled to articulate was finally recognized externally. My parents reacted with visible shock and sorrow. My mother cried quietly while my father sat rigid, absorbing the consequences. They asked if there was any way to stop the process now that rulings were forming. I told them the time for intervention had passed, and that support now meant respecting outcomes, not undoing them. It was the hardest conversation we had yet because it dismantled their illusion of control over family dynamics. As summer approached, the house filled with light again, and I began hosting small gatherings of friends who understood and respected my boundaries. Laughter returned without tension, and the ocean seemed brighter, reflecting a calm earned through difficult choices. The legal battle was not over, but my internal one had shifted toward clarity. Lauren retreated further into bitterness, posting vague messages online about betrayal and injustice. Megan followed suit, amplifying grievances, while Olivia remained silent, stepping back from public view entirely. Their paths diverged under pressure, revealing truths long hidden beneath forced unity. Standing on the terrace one evening watching the sun dip into the Pacific, I felt a quiet strength settle in. Whatever lay ahead, I knew I would meet it grounded in self-respect rather than obligation. The next phase promised confrontation, resolution, and lasting change, and I was finally ready to face it without retreat. As the final hearings approached, the atmosphere around the case grew heavier and more charged. Every interaction seemed to carry extra weight, as if the truth itself was pressing forward, demanding acknowledgement. My attorney prepared me for intensified tactics, warning that desperation often bred unpredictability. She was right, because Lauren and Megan shifted strategies again, attempting to sway opinion rather than evidence. Their legal filings grew more aggressive, filled with accusations about emotional cruelty and alleged verbal abuse, claims that felt surreal to read, yet reflected how far they were willing to go to avoid responsibility. I remained composed on the surface, but internally the strain manifested in subtle ways. Restless sleep, tension in my shoulders, moments of sudden fatigue. Therapy sessions became anchors where I unpacked the toll of sustained conflict and learned grounding techniques to stay centered. I reminded myself daily that defending truth did not require aggression, only consistency. The house continued to be my refuge, and I leaned into routines that reinforced stability: early swims, long walks along the cliffs, and evenings spent sketching designs that reconnected me with creativity beyond conflict. The mediation failure pushed the case back into full litigation, and the courtroom became the stage where years of dynamics finally unfolded under scrutiny. Witnesses were called, including neighbors, former mall employees, and even a city zoning official, who explained clearly how the operation violated multiple regulations. Listening to the methodical dismantling of excuses felt validating yet emotionally draining, because each point confirmed intentional planning rather than ignorance. Lauren's demeanor shifted between indignation and visible frustration as her narrative unraveled in real time. Megan took the stand next and attempted to minimize her role, claiming she only handled minor logistics under Lauren's direction. Under cross-examination, transaction records contradicted her statements, showing consistent management of payments and scheduling. Her irritation escalated into defensiveness, and the judge intervened, reminding her to answer directly. Watching her composure fracture revealed how fragile their unity had become when confronted with facts. Olivia's testimony was the most emotionally complex. She spoke softly, admitting her participation, and fear, acknowledging she knew it was wrong, but felt trapped by loyalty and dependence. Her honesty did not erase consequences, but it shifted perception, casting her less as instigator and more as follower. The judge acknowledged this distinction, noting her cooperation and remorse. I felt a complicated mix of empathy and sadness, recognizing how fear had shaped her choices, yet still holding firm that accountability mattered. Lauren returned to the stand, attempting one final appeal, framing her actions as sacrifice and resourcefulness. She spoke of family obligations and financial stress, accusing me of abandoning them emotionally through my career focus. Hearing this narrative laid bare stirred old guilt, but therapy had taught me to separate responsibility from manipulation. My attorney countered, effectively presenting evidence of planning, profit margins, and messages boasting about success. The contrast between claimed intent and documented reality was stark and undeniable. When I testified, I spoke calmly, describing not just the violation of property but the breach of trust during a time of grief. I explained how discovering the copied key felt like losing safety in my own life. My voice wavered only once when recounting how long I monitored footage, hoping they would stop on their own. That admission resonated in the room, highlighting restraint rather than vindictiveness. The judge listened intently, asking clarifying questions that affirmed understanding. Outside the courtroom, media attention grew as the case touched on broader themes of property rights and familial exploitation. I avoided interviews, declining to participate in public discourse, while Lauren embraced vague online statements that framed her as victim. The contrast reinforced my choice to let facts speak rather than emotions perform. Friends shielded me from headlines, sharing only what mattered and reminding me why silence was strength, not weakness. My parents attended several sessions, sitting quietly in the back row. The cumulative weight of testimony visibly affected them. My father's posture softened over time, and my mother stopped defending hypothetical misunderstandings. One evening after court, they asked to speak privately. We sat in the car overlooking the harbor, where they admitted they had underestimated the severity of what happened. My father apologized for pressuring me to forgive prematurely, and my mother acknowledged how grief blinded them to betrayal. It was not complete healing, but it was honest, and that honesty mattered. As deliberations began, the waiting period tested my patience more than any previous phase. Days stretched without updates, and uncertainty crept in during quiet moments. I reminded myself that outcomes did not define worth, and that boundaries already stood regardless of verdict. Still, the anticipation carried emotional weight, because final rulings would shape future interactions permanently. During this time, Olivia reached out through her attorney, requesting a separate conversation facilitated professionally. I agreed cautiously, and met her in a controlled setting. She expressed remorse without excuses, acknowledging the harm caused and accepting consequences. She did not ask for forgiveness, only understanding. I told her accountability was the first step toward any future relationship, and that trust would take time if it ever returned. The conversation ended respectfully, marking a divergence from the hostility that defined interactions with Lauren and Megan. Lauren reacted poorly to Olivia's cooperation, accusing her of betrayal and further fracturing their alliance. Megan oscillated between anger and panic, realizing liability was unavoidable. Their communications grew erratic and increasingly hostile until advised by counsel to stop direct contact. Observing their unraveling from a distance reinforced how avoidance of responsibility corrodes relationships faster than truth ever could. The verdict day arrived quietly, without spectacle. The courtroom felt subdued as the judge delivered a detailed ruling outlining violations, intent, and consequences. Lauren and Megan were found fully liable, ordered to pay restitution damages and legal fees, and issued formal restraining conditions regarding my property. Olivia received reduced penalties contingent on continued. The weeks after the verdict unfolded with a quiet, unfamiliar calm, the kind that felt almost unsettling after months of tension. My days slowed into a rhythm shaped by intention rather than reaction. Mornings began with sunlight spilling across the water, and evenings ended with deliberate stillness. The house no longer felt like something to defend, but something to inhabit fully. Each room reclaimed, not just physically but emotionally, as I allowed myself to exist without anticipation of intrusion or conflict. Lauren disappeared from my immediate world, retreating into silence broken only by distant rumors carried through family channels. She refused contact and rejected accountability, choosing bitterness over reflection. Megan followed a similar path, relocating temporarily and avoiding gatherings where questions might arise. Their absence created space that felt both relieving and heavy. Because loss does not always arrive through death but through distance, shaped by choice. I mourned not who they were but who I once hoped they could be. Olivia maintained limited contact through structured boundaries, honoring the conditions set by the court. She attended counseling and sent occasional updates without expectation. Our communication remained careful and restrained, yet grounded in honesty rather than manipulation. Trust did not rebuild quickly, but respect began to form in its place. I learned that reconciliation was not a requirement for peace, and that some relationships evolve into quieter forms without disappearing entirely. My parents changed in subtle yet meaningful ways. They stopped urging forgiveness as an obligation and instead listened when I spoke about boundaries and self-preservation. Visits became intentional rather than assumed, and conversations shifted toward understanding rather than correction. The power dynamics that once defined our interactions softened as they accepted that my independence did not equate to rejection. This adjustment felt long overdue and fragile, yet real. Professionally, my career flourished as if unburdened by emotional weight I had carried unconsciously. The coastal redevelopment project advanced rapidly, and my leadership role expanded. Colleagues noted my clarity and decisiveness, and I recognized those traits had always existed but were no longer diluted by guilt. Success felt cleaner, more aligned with self-respect rather than survival. The distinction mattered deeply as I redefined what fulfillment meant on my own terms. The house became a gathering place again, not out of obligation but choice. Friends visited, bringing warmth, laughter, and shared silence that required no explanation. Dinners stretched long into the night, filled with stories and ease rather than tension. The ocean views served as a reminder that peace was not passive but cultivated through difficult decisions honored daily. I allowed myself to enjoy what I had built without apology or justification. Therapy continued, not as crisis management but as maintenance. A space to reflect, integrate, and reinforce lessons learned. I explored how early family dynamics shaped my sense of responsibility, and how letting go of control did not mean losing care. Compassion no longer required self-sacrifice, and love no longer demanded endurance of harm. These realizations reshaped how I approached all relationships with discernment rather than fear. One afternoon I revisited the original sketches of the house, spreading them across the dining table, tracing lines that once represented hope and escape. I saw how much of my identity had been embedded into those walls and how reclaiming the space mirrored reclaiming myself. The design was no longer just architecture but a testament to resilience, intention, and earned autonomy. Standing there, I felt gratitude not just for the outcome but for the courage it took to pursue it. Community ties strengthened as neighbors invited me into gatherings and conversations that had once felt distant. Trust rebuilt through presence rather than performance, and I became part of a network defined by mutual respect rather than proximity alone. Their support throughout the ordeal had reminded me that chosen connections often provide stability when inherited ones falter. Olivia eventually requested a brief visit accompanied by clear boundaries and professional oversight. The meeting was quiet, reflective, and grounded in accountability. She did not seek absolution, only understanding and acknowledgement of growth. I shared my truth without accusation and listened without obligation. When we parted, there was no promise of closeness, but there was respect, and that felt sufficient. Lauren remained unreachable, and Megan unresolved. Their paths diverged sharply from mine, and I accepted that divergence without chasing closure. Some endings do not come with understanding, only acceptance, and that acceptance was an act of self-care, rather than surrender. I released the need to be seen as right by those unwilling to see clearly. As seasons shifted, the house evolved with me. Plants grew, fuller walls held new art, and routines settled into something sustainable. I hosted small workshops for young designers, sharing knowledge without hierarchy, and mentoring with intention. Giving back felt different now, rooted in abundance, rather than obligation. Looking out over the Pacific one evening, as the sun dipped low, I reflected on the journey not with resentment but clarity. The conflict had forced me to articulate values I once assumed were understood. Boundaries, self-respect, and accountability were no longer abstract ideals but lived practices. I carried those practices forward into every decision, knowing they would shape a future built on stability rather than compromise. The experience reshaped my definition of family, expanding it beyond blood to include those who honored truth and respected limits. Love became something that strengthened rather than drained, and peace something protected rather than postponed. The house stood as a symbol not of conflict but of resolution earned through courage and consistency. I did not emerge unscarred, but I emerged whole, and that wholeness mattered more than preserving appearances. The story did not end with reconciliation or applause, but with alignment between who I was and how I lived. That alignment was the quiet victory no one could take from me. As night settled and lights flickered along the distant coastline, I breathed deeply, feeling grounded in the present and confident in the path ahead. The journey had tested every assumption I held about loyalty and worth, yet it delivered something far more valuable: clarity. With that clarity, I stepped forward, ready to build not just structures but a life defined by intention, truth, and unshakable self-respect.